Hello, elephants in the room, and welcome to the European University Institute Equity, Diversity and Inclusion podcast. Here we explore how different factors such as gender and gender identity, sex, race, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, religion or belief, disability, weight affect every part of our society, from our places of work to politics, from culture to history, food, and everything in between. We will also reflect together with our guests on the intersectionality of these factors, both within the same under-recognized groups presenting these characteristics and in the wider society. This podcast makes us all part of the conversation because we are all part of the story. My name is Giuseppe Zago, I'm the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the UI. And today I'm joined by
Cristina,
another host.
the ADI trainee.
Yes, and a psychologist, if I can add.
Yes, thank you.
Great. And today we are very happy to have with us, joining our discussion, Michael Widdowson. Michael is a PhD researcher in the law department here at the UI. And we're very happy to have you here, Michael, because this recording marks 1 year from the first episode of the podcast. So
amazing.
Yes, this is a little bit of a celebration today. And in our first episode, we talked about disabilities in occasion of the International Day of People with Disabilities, which is on the 3rd of December. And after Michael contacted us, we decided to go back to discuss more about disability awareness and social barriers to inclusion when it comes to different types of disability. So with Michael, we will have a chat on what it means to live with a hidden disability and what society still does not get in the way we consider disability and disabled people. So Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you for being here. I'd say we can start by telling our listeners a little bit more about what is dyspraxia.
Yes, so I have developmental dyspraxia and have been diagnosed as such since I was 11 years old. And developmental dyspraxia can be defined as a specific learning difficulty in which the person affected has issues with hand-eye coordination. So they may have difficulties with, say, balancing, performing certain sports. I mean, I myself, for example, can't even ride a bike. I could never learn how to ride a bike because of that. But also it affects fine motor skills, which affects the type of quality of the handwriting you can produce. For instance, you may see on a piece of paper I technically write doctor's handwriting, you could say, because my handwriting is basically illegible. And also it intersects with other conditions such as dyscalculia, where I have difficulties in sequencing and doing mental maths, which is just impossible for me to do. And also to a certain extent with dyslexia, since I also have difficulties with spelling certain words, particularly when I'm trying to have to spell in French. That's particularly horrible. But the NHS, in their definition of dyspraxia, defines it as a common disorder, which as a term I have certain issues with.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, the problem I have with the term common disorder is that it somehow implies that dyspraxia is both common and it implies that there's something wrong with the person inside, which there isn't in both ways. Because first of all, I wouldn't say it's common, because the reason I'm wanting to do this podcast in the first place is because there's a lack of awareness of dyspraxia out there. And I wouldn't say I don't like to call it a disorder. I would say it's more specific learning difficulty, which is what my bachelor's university stressed it as, because calling it a disorder somehow implies to me that there's something wrong with you, that you have some sort of condition that you're a freak, for example, or someone who is subnormal. And I don't like to consider myself as being that. I am a normal human being like everyone else. I just have a certain learning impediment that may set me back compared with people who don't have, dyspraxia and other specific learning difficulties.
Of course.
You use the word impairment. Would you also describe it as a disability or a hidden disability?
I would probably describe it more as a hidden disability, because it's not a disability that people can see and it's not visible. It's not a disability that, for example, you could see because I'm in a wheelchair or anything. I'm not in a wheelchair. I can walk and I just look like everyone else. And when I tell people I have dyspraxia or this condition, a lot of people are quite surprised that I even have a disability in the first place.
You already mentioned some daily aspects that might be affected by dyspraxia. I'm wondering how was this for you growing up? You mentioned that you were diagnosed at 11 years old. So how was it for you?
It was hard. It was hard for me because when I was at school, I would often know a lot of information, and I'd retain information quite well that many people wouldn't know, like certain facts about history, for example, like and all of that. But I would always struggle with the basics at school. Like I would be terrible like at mental math. My handwriting would be basically illegible. I had difficulties in spelling tests constantly. But yeah, I was able to retain information very well and tell, like certain aspects of, say, historical information where what led up to, say, something like the Great Fire of London, for instance. I mean, I knew like all this substantive information in my head, and I was able to express it very well orally, but I could never get it down because nobody could read what I was writing. And when I was at school, I was often placed in like the bottom sets of classes a lot of the time, particularly in primary school, before I was diagnosed, because while I was good at certain aspects, I was always terrible, with like getting it down on paper and writing down the basics, because nobody could read what I was writing.
And the diagnosis helped? Was it better after you got diagnosed?
100%, yeah, because I then knew, what the issue was and were able to trace what it was and do the necessary steps that would actually help, in addressing the issues that I faced and to make my daily life, that bit easier.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And now, in your adult life, how does a regular day look like for you? Do you still have some barriers that you face?
I mean, a regular day for me is just a regular day for everyone else more than anything else. I mean, I get up on a morning, I have my breakfast, I brush my teeth and all that. I would say that it's, even though I have a hidden disability, what I do in the morning is kind of the same as everyone else. I only encounter a few small difficulties. For example, one of the difficulties I often have is carrying a cup of tea. If I'm having like a cup of tea on a morning, I often have difficulty in balancing the mug, and many times, especially if I'm carrying 2 cups at once, I often spill tea on the floor. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, and aside from the fact that I can't ride a bike to get to wherever I need to go to and all of that, a regular day for me is just the same as everyone else. I don't have what I would call a disorder. I'm not subhuman. I am just a normal person.
Thank you for sharing all this, all your experiences with us, because I think it goes back also to the definition of the NHS that you were talking about before, and the fact that as individuals and probably as a society, we still struggle in the way we frame disabilities, and we still consider this as a problem that individuals have, a disorder or something common, as you were saying, in the way it was framed. And so, and especially when it comes to hidden disabilities as well. Whereas, even if you have a disability, you're still a person like anyone else, with the same needs and the same opportunities. At the same time, as a society, we can also do more to equalize the field, let's say, to make our environments more accessible to everyone, really. So I was wondering if you think we could do more in terms of awareness, both as individuals and also in organizations, and if there are some areas we can work a little bit more on ourselves and also as at the systemic level, let's say.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a very good question indeed. I think as in individuals and organisations, I think people need to be aware that disabilities can be hidden, because I think one thing I often encounter is that I think people sometimes don't always believe that hidden disabilities actually exist, because when I say to people I have a disability and they're like, do you? I didn't know you had a disability. You can walk and you seem normal enough. And I'm like, yeah, but just because you have a disability, it's not always visible. And also having a disability does not imply that you're somehow, again, subnormal, as I somehow thought that NHS definition, appeared to imply. I think as organisations, and as people, we need to be aware that disability does not mean that your mobility is impaired. It can also mean that you have other learning issues and learning disabilities as well, and also other developmental disabilities, say like autism, for example, or ADHD, which I think often can go under the microscope for a lot of people because you can't see that someone has that issue. And therefore you just assume that they don't need the support or don't need the help, which should never be assumed, because we need that support in order to get to the same level as those people who don't have, those types of hidden disabilities. And that's something I think a lot of people seem to forget and ignore.
With Christina, we also checked some data on disability and disabilities, especially in the European Union context, and we referred to to a disability strategy that the European Union developed for the period 2021-2030. And maybe you have something to say also on these type of strategies. I don't know, but what you think, the way they approach the topic. But certainly they help us giving a picture of the level of inclusion of people with disabilities. And so we noticed that the EU data show that fewer persons with disabilities gets a university degree than persons without disabilities, and only half of the persons with disabilities have a job as compared to people without disabilities. So first of all, I don't know if this data resonate with you, and also this makes me think of the way disabilities are addressed in the academic setting. So I will start first with this question, and then maybe we can discuss more about this.
Sure. There's quite a lot to unpack here. What I will say is that data doesn't surprise me, and it does resonate with me. And the main reason I would say it is the case is because of the fact that when I was at secondary school, which was after my diagnosis, at the end of primary school, it was extremely difficult to actually get the support measures that I needed. One of the main issues was down to the underfunding in a lot of the public school institutions, where there's not enough money going into the special support. And what ends up happening is that the special support people who are in the school concentrate primarily on those who are most seriously affected, which obviously, they need help as everyone else does. I'm not denying that. But what happens is that those who have really bad behavioural problems or severe learning disabilities, they get a lot of attention. But what happens is, because the resources are not there, those who may have, less serious issues and conditions, we get forgotten about a lot of the time, and left behind in the system. And also there's certain issues, I believe, also with the education system, because with the way that teachers, not just support workers, address certain disabilities, as I am aware that certain teachers may see that a student who is having trouble concentrating, for example, or having trouble, focusing or doing the work that they're being asked to, they may get demonised, for example, as a bad student, as many teachers can be quite poor and lazy like that. And the problem is that when that is done, that demoralises the student, because that's making this person with, say, something like ADHD, for example, who may have difficulty concentrating, somehow believe that they can't get anywhere because of the fact that this teacher's telling them that, and they can't concentrate in class, and that causes, if the condition is unaddressed, to a certain demoralisation in the student, believing that throughout the rest of their lives they can't achieve anything and can't go anywhere, and that they're somehow subnormal. And when you're not actually providing proper teacher training to tell people, that you can't just demonise between good students and bad students. And I will give a shout out to Carol Kirkus from the skills department at the EUI with a teacher training course, because we actually were taught that we can't do that in a teacher training course here at the EUI, so shout out to her on for that one. Also, when the support and the funding, due to the fact that there's massive underfunding of the public education system in general, and also with the public institutions and support institutions in general, when there's not enough support that can help people with specific learning difficulties, and the support can only target, those are the most serious conditions, we get left behind in the loop. And throughout our lives and throughout our time, if we don't get that support, we might not get the grades we need to progress to, higher education. We might not get, we might believe throughout the rest of our lives that we can't, work because we're somehow freaks and weirdos and all that, because we've been taught that by the education system. As a result, I think that's probably one of the main reasons why there's such a disparity between those who were getting, into higher education or even those who are unemployed with disabilities, because that's what we go through with the schooling system. It's a horrible process, and to address that, you really need to ensure that teachers are properly trained and that there's enough money going into the support networks to actually help those who are in school to get diagnosed, to get the issues sorted, as soon as they can, and to be put on the same level, and given the support to be put on the same level as those without these conditions. Because if that doesn't happen, then it's just going to not solve the huge inequality gap that we see from that data. You can do things, like pass bills, for example, the Equality Act to help disabled people, guarantee them interviews, which are good measures. But if you don't tackle these issues in the schooling system early on, those will just have, just put a bandage on a much larger issue.
Mm-hmm. The Equality Act in the UK, right? You were referring to the Equality Act, exactly.
Yeah.
We were chatting also before the podcast about the challenges when you are within a certain cycle of your education pathway, let's say, but also the challenges when you move from one cycle to the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when you move from high school to university. So, would you like to tell us something about also the role of gatekeepers and how bias can play a role in there, or discrimination or lack of awareness?
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a really good story to tell about this one, and a pretty horrible one as well. So basically in the UK, I'll just start with our education system. We have 3 forms of education that you go through. We have primary school, which I've addressed, is when you're from the age of about 3 till 11. Then you have secondary school that you go through when you're 12 to 15 or 16, which is kind of the equivalent of, high school middle school, in America. And then you have college, which you only go through for 2 years. Now, college is a bit of a strange system in the UK, where when you're about from the ages of 16 to 18, you go through that to get your A levels and all of that for you to get into university, basically. And this is where I had the issue with the gatekeepers that you were referring to, because when I wanted to apply for university places, in the UK, you have to go through an application portal called UCAS. It's kind of like the equivalent of Bac Soup, for example, that they had in France. I don't know what the Italian equivalent is. I'm so sorry.
I'm not sure either, to be honest.
You apply for university places, you select the course and the university that you want, write a personal statement and all that, like you would do with most regular applications and all that sort of thing. But what needs to happen is that it's the responsibility of the college to send off the UCAS application to the organisation UCAS, and then the wider organisation, UCAS that is, sends off the application to each of the universities that you've applied for. And the reason why that system occurs is because the college teachers, they need to provide a reference for you, when you're in your application and all of that, and then it gets sent off by the college administration. But what happened for me was that I applied for about 5 universities. I applied for Sheffield, Birmingham, Kent, Bangor, and I think that was it, actually. I don't think I applied for any more. I think it was 4 universities I applied for. And what ended up happening was the college basically saw what I'd applied for, and when other people had their UCAS applications sent off, mine was still stuck. It had never been sent off by the college, and we were saying to the college, they hadn't told me anything, no communication, nothing had been emailed to me. I said, what's going on with my application? Everyone else's UCAS application been sent off, but mine's stuck here. What's happening? I didn't really get anywhere, and it ended up, what my parents ended up having to do was go and complain to the college and say, why has his UCAS application not been sent off? He wants to apply for these university places. And the college would basically say, oh, well, we know that Michael has a disability, but we think that the places he's applied for are too high for him, with entry requirements are too high, and he's going to get rejections. My disability would result in rejections for these universities, and it would reflect bad on their own statistics, and which was outrageous. And basically my mum went to the college and said, send it off. Like, we're literally saying to the college, send the application off. I don't give a monkey's toss if we get rejections or not. I am confident that I at least have one institution, which is Bangor in my case, where I could go to in the event that I do get rejections from all these other places. So we had them the college send it off and all that, and what ended up happening was that I actually got offers for all 4 of the places.
Wow.
No rejections, contrary to what the college believed. To be fair, the person who was in charge of the house who was responsible for that, I did get an apology from her, to be fair, when I saw her. But I think what ended up happening was, I don't think it was necessarily her. I think it was the higher upper management of the college, because we had this really horrible woman who was effectively a principal of that college, which
we won't name in this podcast.
No, we won't. But anyone who went to my college, who, whenever you mention her, they always say, "Oh, I fucking hate her," and then the woman we won't name. Sorry, I've just said.
So people might know already who she is.
We're gonna be sued, but that's fine. We're gonna counter-sue.
I don't think anyone who went to my college will be listening. But there might be. But yeah, I think it was to do with that. And every time I got an offer from one of these universities, what I always did was I went to the careers advisor of the college, lovely lady, by the way, really nice lady who worked there, and I would say to her, oh, yeah, I have got an offer from this university that your college said I would get rejected from, and that would actually result, and I think the careers advisor was actually on my side too, because what she would always do is she would actually make a note of that on the portal system, so it could be visible by all the college staff that I got an offer to this particular place.
Amazing. So you were kind of a role model, let's say.
This must be super satisfying that you got to do that, but I mean, you shouldn't have to.
No.
But at least, I mean, I hope you got the satisfaction from this horrible lady being wrong.
Yeah, definitely.
This lack of awareness puts you in a very oxymoron situation, that at the same time you need to prove that you're a normal person, and you deserve to be treated as anyone else, and at the same time that you really also deserve to have the barriers lifted for you and the support you need for your impairment. But at the same time, that doesn't make you less of a person, which some people don't seem to understand. So I imagine that you found yourself in situations where you had to explain your disability, and especially, as you mentioned, it's not a visible one, so maybe people are less likely to accept it, or less likely to provide the support you need because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do sometimes have to explain my disability. I think the main issues with support, though, is not so much that I don't get the support because of my disability. In the case of the schools, it was because of the underfunding. But I do remember when I first came to the EUI, I basically had to tell my supervisor and all that that I had this developmental dyspraxia first time I'd met him, and my supervisor, he's a lovely man, really, really, really nice man, but unfortunately he didn't actually know what the disability was, so I had to explain to him, and many times I have to explain to other people, which can be quite frustrating, and all of that, and I had to, tell the academic services, at the EUI that I had the disability in that, and to be fair, they did put the support in that I needed and everything, so I didn't have much issues with my disability not being taken seriously because of my the fact that by the institutions, because of the fact that I don't appear disabled or anything. I think the main issue is that there is a lack of support available from many places, particularly like in the public school system, because of the lack of money available, but also because I think the issue is kind of the opposite, because at least in the education system, because people know you have a disability, they somehow think that you're somehow subnormal or incapable of achieving the goals that you want, and that always has a bad effect on you. I mean, even when I came here, people are very nice and supportive here and everything, but even when I came here, I had doubts, whether I was even capable of doing the PhD. Like, the imposter syndrome kind of sets in a lot of the time when you have a disability, and it wasn't really until I felt much better and felt more like I deserved to be, and I wasn't like an imposter in some way in my own body, when I sat in on the interviews, they do here at the EUI when they're interviewing candidates who want to do the PhD places. And when I actually saw when I was sat on the interviews, that the actual jury process and all that, and is actually quite strict, and they only select a very small few people to come here, and I saw that firsthand. I was like, yeah, I've done well to come here after all, and in spite of the barriers that I previously had faced and everything, and all of that, I'm not a fraud. I actually deserve, to study at such a prestigious place, and I hope it proves that others, who have similar learning difficulties, can achieve those similar goals.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it makes me think of an episode that we did before this about mental health, and we were discussing about the issue of imposter syndrome that many PhD researchers have, and that it becomes even more of a heavy burden if you have a disability, or if you are part of an underrepresented groups, and so you have to deal and to navigate different kind of barriers and lack of awareness when you talk with people where they, I don't know, your co-workers or your supervisors, but even when you hang around outside your research project. So yes, I think it's really important that we work on that, and also we challenge this bias that we all have, but that I think your story shows that can be overcome.
To be honest, when the whole system treats you, either ignores you, or when it treats you as something that is kind of subnormal to other people, or treats you in a way when you're throughout the education system that you can't, somehow achieve the goals that you did. Coming back to, you remember that disparity in the statistics we saw with the employment of disabled people. It's no wonder that people, feel that they are frauds in their body when they finally do achieve something and do well, because they're like, this is not something that should happen. I must have, somehow acted, in a fraudulent or deceiving way to get in here, and all that sort of thing, and all of that. And it is common with people with specific learning difficulties. I was previously president of the yoga society at my university, and I interviewed a series of yoga instructors. One of them had a very similar tale where she had, it really touched me actually when I interviewed her. She had dyslexia in her case, and she got into yoga because of, partly because of her disability, because she worked in a very intensive commercial London marketing firm, and she got that job and position and everything, but she constantly had this burden of imposter syndrome on her all the time, because she felt as though she didn't deserve the position and all that sort of thing, and because it was quite an intensive environment, it wasn't really good for her on her mental health. And she actually got into yoga through doing that, through that actual stressful experience, and she then ended up training as a yoga instructor in India, and then doing yoga classes on top of working from home, by doing like marketing work as well. And it's common because we're always taught that we can't achieve, like the goals and ambitions that we want because we have apparently the burden of this disorder, as I'll quote the NHS again, upon us. And we don't feel at times that we deserve what we get, when in reality we really do, and we've overcome a lot of barriers to get where we are. And I think I really want other people to know who have specific learning difficulties is that you are a normal person. You can achieve the goals that you want. Don't let anyone bring you down in any sort of way. You have got this. You can get what you want and achieve what you want. Don't listen to the haters. Don't listen to certain higher-ups. You've got this.
This is a very important message. And I think what you're saying is highlighting how disability cannot be looked at outside of a social framework and an institutional context, because it affects people so broadly. And of course, we should celebrate disabled people in academia, but they shouldn't be the bright examples. That it should be as accessible as it is to anyone else. You shouldn't have to face a disproportionate amount of barriers to reach this level.
I think it also goes back to the concept of normalcy that you were talking about before. So I think we're still, our mindset is still based on this idea that, and as a consequence also our organizations, I think, they're based on this concept that there is a certain person that is normal, in a certain model, and the way we work or the way we do research sometimes even it's very much modeled on that idea and the concept, and we're still there is still a lot of work to do to reverse that idea. And so let aside that concept of normalcy and really embrace our differences, and the fact that, as you were saying, probably if you have a disability you had to face many challenges, but you also have so many resources that, let's say, an able-bodied person doesn't have. And so I think there is still a lot of work to do in getting this idea embedded in in the way we think about the world, really. It's not just about work. So I think that's an amazing message.
I agree with both points, and I think the issue of hidden disabilities, when coming to the point of normalcy, is the fact that when someone sees you with a hidden disability, you look kind of normal because as we mentioned before, you don't have a physical disability, you can walk and all that sort of thing, so you're not initially viewed as being disabled. But then when you tell someone that you are disabled, that kind of shakes that concept, that bias rather, that many people may have of normalcy around it, confuses people because of the fact that you have told them you have a disability, but you're like, you don't look disabled, and it just totally causes a bit of a meltdown in the biases of the brain that people may have, because they're like, well, you don't look disabled. I mean, how can you have a disability? And I'm like, because it's a learning disability I have, that's why. And that's an issue. I think it needs to really be addressed, that you have to be aware that if someone has a disability, it doesn't mean that they're in a wheelchair or on crutches or something. It means that it can be hidden as well, equally, and that's the issue with this concept of normalcy. And you said very correctly that we have to embrace our differences, and people have to respect and understand our differences and embrace those more, because I mean, we may be different to other people, we may confuse these biases that you may have, but we are, at the end of the day, like just like everyone else, we just might have, certain issues that, as I said earlier, that we may need extra support for, or we may behave maybe slightly different, because in some ways dyspraxia also can interlink with autism in some ways as well. And you have to understand and respect those differences. But I will say that with the support that's available, it is a lot better, you know, in some ways. I mean, obviously there's issues with the public funding and everything that's gotten worse, sadly, but in other ways, you know, like with the type of technology that's available nowadays, I mean, it does make, you know, like having these conditions a lot more bearable than it was at one time. Like, I think one of the best things that happened was at the EUI when they finally got Grammarly, and that really helped with like certain, you know, correcting certain spelling issues that I may have, because I also struggle to like spell a lot of the time, and other forms of technology. You know, it's really great that we can now type work down and type our thesis. It makes such a difference, because if we were still having to, you know, write, I mean, God, it would be impossible for me, because like nobody could probably read what I was putting down. I mean, and everything. And since the pandemic, we've also had, you know, like Zoom and all that sort of thing, and video conferencing tools, which make things more accessible to people as well. Like if someone can't get to, say, you know, a building for a meeting or something, possibly by a disability, you know, tools like Zoom and teleworking, it just makes that so much easier for those who are disabled, you know, to actually work from home and everything. It's so in some ways, as we've moved on throughout the years, with the technology that we have made the world more inclusive and better for disabled people, but there are still things and ways in which we can make improvements.
So I hope you melted down many brains today, Marco. That was really super interesting. And Christina, I think we have our final question that we asked to all our guests.
Yes, it's kind of our favorite question.
Okay.
So we would want to ask you if you have any books, movies, or podcasts related to what we talked to today, or even about other topics that you want to recommend to our listeners.
So one of my favourite, I will recommend a film on this, which is related to disability that I quite like a lot. It's a French film called Intouchable, or Untouchable. It was released in 2011, and I actually did this film as part of my speaking exposé for my A-level French. And it's a very good film where it's a story about a man. He's actually quite a wealthy man as well, who is has a physical disability. In his case, he's paraplegic, and he needs to hire a carer for himself. And basically, he gets a man who turns up who is basically from the banlieue in France, which is like the poorest suburbs. For many of our French viewers, you'll be aware that there's quite a strong classist view of the banlieue in France, which is something I don't like, but that's another topic entirely. And he basically came just to sign for his benefits, but the actual disabled man hired him because he liked the fact that he was not bothered by money and everything, and he seemed to actually care about his needs, and he took him on and hired him, and they formed like a strong friendship together. And it shows to me that this film, that no matter what social class you come from, or no matter what disability you have, you can still be friends with other people from different backgrounds, and that's really important, because people don't seem to be aware. We've discussed the French classism of the banlieues, for example, that just because you're from a different background or different walk of life, or if you have a disability, you somehow can't be friends with people who are different from you in some way. And I will say, and I want to finish this off with recommending this film, the reason why I like this film a lot is not only because it's a great film, but it's actually a true story.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great to have you here. And for our listeners, you can listen to this podcast in all main platforms on the Radio Cavolo website, and you'll find also a news item soon in our EUI website. And I would like to also thank you, of course, Christina and Andrea, who is helping us all the time with the podcast, and this project wouldn't have been possible without him as well. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Michael, again. And,
thank you, Giuseppe.
Yeah, see you soon.